What would you do if your pastor told you that your children's life and your life is in danger because your husband is a ritualist? This is a beautiful story of Chijioke and Mrs. Ife. In the bustling city of Aba, life flowed like the river. People hurried to and fro selling their goods in the market. Children played in the streets and laughter filled the air. Among the busy streets and colorful market lived a happy family everyone admired. Mr. Chijioke and Mrs. Ife, along with their 3 bright children. Mr. Chijioke was a kind-hearted man known for his big smile and even brighter dreams. He worked as a carpenter, crafting beautiful furniture that filled the homes of many families in Aba. His hands were strong from the years of labor, and his heart was even stronger, filled with love for his wife and children. Mrs. Ife was a caring mother who always put her family first. She spent her days cooking delicious meals and ensuring her home was a place of warmth and happiness. The smell of jollof rice often wafted from her home, making the children rush to the kitchen excited for dinner. Ife loved telling her children stories, beautiful stories of bravery and kindness that sparked their imagination. Chika, the eldest, was 10 years old. He was curious and adventurous, always asking questions about the world around him. Nneka, the middle child at 8, was wise beyond her years. She often helped her mother with chores and had a gentle way of caring for her younger brother Uche, who was just 5. Uche was full of energy and laughter, always looking for mischief, but with a heart of gold. Every evening, the family would sit together, sharing stories about their day. They would talk about school, friends, and dreams for their future. The bond between them was strong, filled with love, laughter, and support. They were a happy family, and everyone in Aba could see it. But life has a way of changing unexpectedly. As the sun set on their beautiful home, little did they know that soon their life would take a turn that would change everything forever. One sunny afternoon, the news spread quickly through the streets of Aba. A new pastor had arrived in town. His name was Emeka. Pastor Emeka was known for his powerful sermon that captivated the hearts of many. People were curious and excited, eager to see this man who had traveled from far away to share their messages. The following Sunday, the church was filled with people eager to hear Pastor Emeka speak. Mrs. Ife, wanting to feel connected to her community, decided to take her children to the service. As they entered the church, the atmosphere was electric. The walls were adorned with colorful decoration, and the air buzzed with excitement. Pastor Emeka stood at the front, a tall man with charismatic presence. His voice rang through the church, filling every corner with warmth and energy. He spoke of hope, faith, and importance of family, and everyone listened with rapt attention. Mrs. Ife felt inspired, and her heart swelled with a renewed sense of purpose. After the service, Pastor Emeka greeted the congregation with genuine, warm smile. He made his way to Mrs. Ife and her children, kneeling down to speak with Uche, who shyly hid behind his mother's skirts. "You have a beautiful family, my sister," he said, his eyes twinkling with charm. "God has big plans for you." As the days passed, Pastor Emeka became a regular presence in the community. He organized prayers, meetings, and gatherings, drawing people in with his magnetic personality. Mrs. Ife attended more services, feeling increasingly drawn to the pastor's messages. She found solace in his words and began to confide in him about her struggles as a mother and a wife. Slowly, the pastor started to weave his influence over her, introducing ideas that would plant seeds of doubt. He often spoke about the importance of spiritual awareness and the danger that are locked in the shadow. One day, he made a troubling remark. "Sometimes, The people we trust the most can be the ones who deceive us. Be vigilant, for evil often wears a familiar face. These words lingered in Mrs. Ife's mind, planting doubt about her husband, Mr. Chijioke. She began to wonder if her husband was truly the man she believed him to be. The pastor's word echoed in her thought, causing a rift in her heart. As the weeks went by, Pastor Emeka's influence on Mrs. Ife grew stronger. She found herself attending church services more frequently, captivated by the pastor's teaching. He had a way of speaking that made her feel understood and valued, especially when he discussed the role of men and women in the family. One evening, as they were preparing for dinner, Mrs. Ife brought up a conversation from the church. Pastor Emeka said that we must always be aware of the intentions of those close to us. What if someone we love is hiding something dark? She said, her voice filled with concern. Mr. Chijioke looked up from the pot he was stirring. What do you mean, Ife? Are you worried about me? He laughed lightly, but there was a hint of confusion in his face. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if you could be hiding something, she admitted, feeling a mix of guilt and fear. Mr. Chijioke paused, taken aback. Why would you think that? I love you and our children more than anything. But Mrs. Ife couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The pastor had suggested that Mr. Chijioke might be involved in dark practices, calling him a ritualist. Although she had never seen any signs of this, the pastor's words haunted her. Each time Mr. Chijioke came home late or mentioned a friend she didn't know, her heart would race with fear and doubt. The pastor continued to meet with Mrs. Ife, and the conversation became more intense. He painted a picture of her husband that was frightening, different from the man she loved. You must protect yourself and your children. I have seen families torn apart by deceit. Your husband may appear caring, but is he truly a man of God? Pastor Emeka questioned. These manipulative words took root in Mrs. Ife's heart. She started to isolate herself from Mr. Chijioke, spending more time at the church, drawn in by the pastor's charm and persuasive nature. As she confided in him, he filled her mind with thoughts of betrayal and danger, pushing her further away from her husband. One day, after a particular emotional service, Mrs. Ife found herself in tears. Pastor Emeka comforted her, and she felt a deep sense of connection. The more time she spent with the pastor, the more convinced she became that her husband was a threat. The tension in the house grew palpable. Mr. Chijioke noticed the change in Mrs. Ife. She was more distant, often lost in thought, and sometimes he would catch her whispering to herself. He worried about her mental state and tried to engage her in conversation, but she always brushed him off with vague replies. One evening, as they sat at the dining table, Chika looked up from her plate and asked, "Mommy, are we still going to church on Sunday?" Mrs. Ife hesitated, glancing at Mr. Chijioke. "Of course, Chika. The pastor has been teaching us so many things." Mr. Chijioke frowned. "What kinds of things, Ife? I thought church was about love and unity, not division." Mrs. Ife felt a rush of anger. "You wouldn't understand. Pastor Emeka is trying to help us see the truth." Chika and Nneka exchanged worried glances, sensing the growing tension between their parents. Uche, oblivious to the argument, continued to eat his food, unaware of the emotional storm brewing around him. Days turned into weeks, and Mrs. Ife became increasingly consumed by the pastor's teaching. One fateful day, he pulled her aside after a service and said, "You must make a choice, Ife. Your royalty must lie with your children and yourself. Your husband may not have your best interests at heart. He could be involved in dark practices. That night, Mrs. Ife sat in bed, her mind racing. The pastor's word echoed in her ears, and she felt an overwhelming sense of fear. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that she could no longer ignore the doubts planted in her heart. Finally, she made the decision to confront Mr. Chijioke. The next morning, she gathered her children around the table. "I need to talk to you all," she said, her voice trembling. Mr. Chijioke's heart sank as he saw the seriousness in her eyes. "What is it, Ife?" "I can't stay in this house anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "The pastor has shown me the truth. I believe he is right about you." The words hit Mr. Chijioke like a thunderbolt. "What do you mean? I've done nothing but love you and our children." But Mrs. Ife was resolute. "I can't risk my children's life. I have to protect them from you." With that, she turned away from him and wrote a note, leaving it on the table as she packed. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Ife packed her belongings, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. Mr. Chijioke stood at the doorway, disbelief ached on his face. "Ife, please, you can't just leave. Think of our children. They need you." "I'm doing this for them, Chijioke," she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. "Pastor Emeka has shown me that you are a danger to us. I can't stay here another moment with you. I won't let you take them," he said firmly, stepping forward. "You can't take our children away from me because of some lies." The tension in the room thickened as Mrs. Ife glanced at her 3 children. Chika, Nneka, and Uche stood in the hallway, confusion written all over their faces. They had never seen their parents like this before. Uche tugged on his mother's skirt, his innocent eyes searching for answers. "Mommy, where are you going?" he asked, his voice small and scared. Mrs. Nneka knelt down, wrapping her arms around Uche. "I have to go, my love, but I will always be watching you. I love you so much." Chika stepped forward, his face frowned. "Is Daddy hurting you, Mommy? Why can't we go with you?" "No, Chika," she said, shaking her head. "Your father loves you, but I have to leave to keep you safe. Just trust me." Mr. Chijioke felt his heart shatter as he watched the scene unfold. "Ife, please don't do this," he pleaded, tears welling on his eyes. "You're making a huge mistake. Our children need both of us. We can walk through this together." But Mrs. Ife was resolute. She turned away, gathering her bags. "I can't stay in this house where I feel threatened. I am leaving now." As she walked towards the door, Mr. Chijioke stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You're not taking them, Ife. They are my children too. You can't just decide to live without them." Chika and Nneka watched in horror as their parents faced off. They didn't understand why their mother was leaving. They only knew that they didn't want to be separated from her. Uche, still clutching her mother's leg, began to cry. Seeing her children upset broke Mrs. Ife's heart even more. She knelt down again and hugged them tightly. "I love you all. Always remember that," she whispered. "Stay strong for Daddy. He loves you too." With one last glance at her children, she opened the door and stepped outside. The sun was shining brightly, but it felt dark to her. As she walked away from the house, she could hear her children's cry echoing in the ear. "Mommy, don't go," they called out. Their voices filled with fears and confusion. Mrs. Ife wiped her tears, trying to remain strong. She had made her decision, believing she was protecting her family. But deep down, a part of her was shattered. She was leaving her children behind, and she felt the weight of her decision crush her heart. As she walked through the streets of Aba, Mrs. Ife felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. She had left her husband and children behind, believing she was making the right choice. But now, away from their home, the reality of her decision began to sink in. Mrs. Ife found temporary shelter with a friend from church who had a small apartment nearby. Her friend welcomed her with open arms, but Mrs. Ife could not shake off the feeling of emptiness. She spent her days attending church services and listening to the pastor's teaching, hoping to find a solace in his words. Pastor Emeka continued to support her, assuring her that she was on the right path. "You are doing what is best for yourself and your children," he said, his voice soothing and convincing. "You must focus on healing and growing strong. You will see, in no time, they will understand." Days turned into weeks, and the absence of her children weighed heavily on Mrs. Ife. She missed their laughter, their hugs, and the warmth of their love. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining their faces. Chika's curious smile, Nneka's gentle nature, and Uche's playful spirit haunted her dream. Despite the support of her friend and the pastor, Mrs. Ife felt increasingly isolated. The community that once felt welcoming now seemed distant, and she struggled to find her place without her family. Each time she attended the church, she felt a void in her heart, a longing for the life that she had left behind. Meanwhile, Mr. Chijioke faced his own challenges. He was determined to take care of his children, even as he grappled with the sudden loss of his wife. After Mrs. Ife left, he threw himself into his work, hoping to provide stability for Chika, Nneka, and Uche. He took on extra jobs, working long hours to ensure they had enough food on the table and a roof over their heads. Each evening, he would come home to find his children waiting for him, their faces filled with concern. They missed their mother deeply and often asked when she would return. Mr. Chijioke tried his best to reassure them. "Your mother loves you so much. She will come back. We just need to be patient," he would say, even as doubt crept into his own heart. Chika, the eldest, took on a more significant role in the house, helping his father with chores and looking after his younger siblings. Nneka helped with cooking and keeping the house tidy, while Uche often played by himself, missing the warmth of his mother's hugs. The once happy home felt cold and empty. Mr. Chijioke tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the shadow of doubt lingered him. He often wondered what could have driven his wife to leave. He had been nothing but loving and supportive. The thought that she believed him to be dangerous caught him deeply. As the weeks turned into months, the family slowly adapted to their new reality. Mr. Chijioke's love for his children kept him going, but the pain of losing Mrs. Ife never faded. He kept their pictures around the house as a reminder of the life they once had, and each time he looked at them, he felt a mix of love and sorrow. 10 long months passed since Mrs. Ife had left their home, and the weight of her decision began to press down on her heavily. The pastor's words, once a source of comfort, now felt hollow. As she looked out the window of her friend's apartment, watching families pass by, she could see mothers with their children sharing laughter and love. The ache in her heart grew stronger, and she found herself often thinking of her own children, Chika, Nneka, and Uche. Each thought felt like a dagger, reminding her of the warmth she had willingly walked away from. One evening, after returning from a church meeting, Mrs. Ife sat on her bed and looked at a photograph of her family she had tucked away. Tears filled her eyes as she traced her finger over the faces of her children. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. She recalled the joyful times they spent together, the laughter at the dinner table, the bedtime stories, and the way they would snuggle together on the couch. She remembered how Mr. Chijioke would wrap his arms around her, making them feel safe and loved. That was the man she had chosen to marry, the man who had given her a beautiful life. But the pastor's manipulation had clouded her judgment. The doubt he planted on her heart had grown into a storm that led her to abandon the very people who loved her the most. She felt ashamed, lost, and alone. With a heavy heart, Mrs. Ife made the decision to reach out to her family. She picked up her phone and dialed Mr. Chijoke's number, her hands trembling. The phone rang several times, and just as she was about to hang up, he answered. "Hello?" His voice came through the line, and she could hear the surprise mixed with cautiousness. "It's me, Ify," she said softly, her heart racing. Thank you so much for watching today's episode with us. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in my next video. Bye.